The last Royal Air Force Lancaster bomber still flying sweeps in to commemorate one of the most spectacular raids of World War II. On May 16, 1943, using an ultra-secret new weapon, the bouncing bomb, the RAF attacked the hydroelectric dams that supplied Germany's industrial heartland. The squadron flew in pitch darkness at the almost suicidal height of 60 feet. One after another, the bombers dropped their deadly cargo, seemingly oblivious to the concentrated fire of enemy flak. The bouncing bomb skipped across the water, crashing into the dam's wall and sunk. Moments later, it exploded in a huge geyser of water. The Möhne Dam collapsed from the massive pounding of high explosives, and a torrent of water rushed into the valley below, causing untold damage. The Dam Busters raid was one of the most successful feats of precision bombing in World War II, and it was made possible by the unrivaled flying expertise of 617 Squadron and the genius inventor of the bouncing bomb, Dr. Barnes Wallis. When Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany in 1933, he began a massive campaign to rebuild Germany's armed forces. The terms of the Versailles Treaty at the end of World War I had stripped the German military machine. Under Hitler's government, the production of tanks, guns, and other weapons of war commenced in the industrial heartland of Germany, the Ruhr. Most of the power and water for this vast industrial complex was provided by a series of hydroelectric dams and their enormous reservoirs. The dams included the Möhne, Eder, and Sorpe. Together, they provided nearly 2/3 of the Ruhr's energy needs. A growing threat to Europe was brewing inside Nazi Germany, but the British were slow to respond. Only reluctantly did the factories of Britain turn to the manufacture of weapons of war in 1936. The production of weapons designed for defense, such as the fighter planes of the British Royal Air Force, was a top priority. The Hurricane and the Spitfire became the backbone of fighter command. But the Royal Air Force also handled an offensive arm, Bomber Command. Its principal aircraft was the Vickers-Armstrong Wellington twin-engine bomber. The Wellington was designed by a brilliant aeronautical engineer, Dr. Barnes Wallis. Its construction was based on one of Wallis's earlier works, the R-100 airship. In the late 1920s, the R-100 was Britain's most successful airship. The Wellington retained the geodetic framework of the R-100. Not only was its latticework construction extremely sturdy, the plane could continue flying with considerable battle damage. Designed by Wallis and built by Vickers-Armstrong as a private venture, the Wellington was highly advanced for its time.
Any signs of life?
In September 1937, the Bombing Committee of the Air Ministry identified the dams serving the Ruhr as potential targets of war. If the dams were breached and the reservoirs emptied, industrial production in the Ruhr, so vital to Germany's war effort, could be seriously disrupted. But the Royal Air Force did not possess a bomb that was heavy enough to damage the masonry structures, let alone break the dams. In 1939, the heaviest general-purpose bomb in the Royal Air Force Armory weighed only 500 pounds. Not until 1940 did a 1,000-pound general-purpose bomb enter service. Independently of the Air Ministry, Barnes Wallis recognized that the Ruhr dams were a critical target, and if destroyed, could shorten the war dramatically. In October 1939, using German plans printed in pre-war engineering journals, Wallis devised a strategy to breach the Ruhr dams.
And I thought of what would be an engineer's way of stopping the war, and that would be to cut off the power supply to their great armament factories in the Ruhr. which involved bombing the dams, destroying the dams, because, you know, it takes 150 tons of water to make 1 ton of steel. And if we robbed them of all their water supply, they couldn't produce steel, and the war would have come to an end.
Wallace calculated that a 10-ton bomb dropped from 40,000 feet and landing within 150 feet of a masonry dam would cause a shock wave similar to an earthquake, and so massive the dam would collapse. In March 1941, he submitted a comprehensive report to the Air Ministry entitled A Method of Attacking the Axis Powers. The Air Ministry set up a commission to study his proposal. It was called the Aerial Attack on Dams Committee, but there was a catch. No aircraft at the time was capable of carrying the estimated 10-ton load. Undaunted, Wallace proposed the design of a 50-ton Victory bomber capable of carrying his 10-ton earthquake bomb. The plan was met with skepticism by the Air Ministry, but Air Marshal Arthur Tedder gave his support. Tedder introduced Wallace to Lord Beaverbrook, the Minister for Aircraft Production, who tracked the development of the Victory bomber. Wallace was also supported by a member of the Dams Committee, Dr. William Glanville of the Rhodes Research Laboratories at Harmansworth. Glanville volunteered his laboratory for experimental testing. A model of the Moona Dam was painstakingly constructed at the Building Research Station at Garston. Charges made to scale were exploded at various distances from the water face of the model dam to assess the amount of explosives needed to cause a breach. Early results were not encouraging. Even with the introduction in late 1941 of more powerful explosives, the size of the charge needed to breach the dam was far greater than first thought. Wallace and his team decided to continue the experiments, this time against a much larger structure. An abandoned dam at Nantygrow in Wales was selected. The Nantygrow Dam was approximately 1/5 the size of the Moona. But first, more tests were conducted on a model 1/10 the size of the Nantygrow Dam. Again, the experiments were discouraging. So was the first explosion on the real Nantygrow Dam. Wallace calculated that an explosive charge of approximately 13 tons would be needed to breach the dam. Not even the projected Victory bomber could carry such a load. The task seemed hopeless. Wallace would have to find another way to destroy the dams. Throughout the spring of 1942, Dr. Barnes Wallace continued his relentless campaign to design a bomb that could breach Germany's dams. By chance, a colleague of Wallace's, Dr. A. Collins, made a breakthrough discovery. After a failed experiment, Collins decided to demolish his damaged model. He did so by placing a small charge in contact with the water side of the dam. The result was spectacular.
Watch it! Fire!
With the contact explosion, a much smaller charge was needed. A test was set up at the Nantygrow Dam, where previous explosives had failed. On July 24th, a 500-pound charge was suspended against the dam wall at a depth of 10 feet. The dam disintegrated. Calculations indicated that a 7,000-pound charge detonated 30 feet below the water surface could breach the Moona Dam, but only if the explosion occurred in direct contact with the dam wall. Torpedoes were considered, but quickly rejected because of the defensive booms and the nets protecting the dams. Torpedoes also lacked sufficient explosive power. The new Lancaster bomber was capable of carrying a 7,000-pound payload. But there was still no means to deliver such a weapon with the necessary degree of accuracy. Then Barnes Wallis had an inspiration. He remembered a childhood game of skipping stones. The flat pebbles would skip across the water because of the imparted spin around their vertical axis. In a flash of genius, Wallis decided to impart spin around the longitudinal axis of a spherical object to make it skip across the water. He conducted his first trials at home in Effingham, Surrey, with his children firing marbles across a tub of water. He then refined his design at the National Physical Laboratory in Teddington, Middlesex, in a ship testing tank.
Right. 3, 2, 1.
Wallis discovered that backspin imparted both stability and accuracy to his spherical projectile. It also ensured close contact with the dam when it sank after striking the wall. Trials with scaled-down dummy bombs dropped from a Wellington bomber confirmed his theory. Wallis himself released the bombs over Chesil Beach near Weymouth, Dorset. The first fully successful bombing run occurred on Saturday, January 23, 1943. The bouncing bomb was born, but contrary to its name, the weapon was in fact an aerial mine. On January 28th, Wallis showed this actual film footage to the Military High Command and the Aerial Attack on Dams Committee. Ironically, it was the Admiralty that showed the most interest in his design. Earlier in the war, the capital ship bomb was developed specifically to attack heavily armored German warships, such as the mighty battleship Tirpitz, but it proved to be a failure. In August 1942, the Lancasters of 106 Squadron, led by Wing Commander Guy Gibson, had attacked the German aircraft carrier Graf Zeppelin using the capital ship bomb. But the bomb was unstable in flight, and no verifiable hits were obtained. When the capital ship bomb failed, the Admiralty looked for other ways to attack German warships sheltering in harbors and Norwegian fjords. Within days of Wallis's demonstration, the Admiralty placed an order for 250 bouncing bombs, codenamed Highball. The heavier bomb to be used against the Ruhr dams was called Upkeep, and the entire bouncing bomb program was codenamed Golf Mine. But the Chief of Bomber Command, Sir Arthur Harris, declared the scheme rubbish. He said, "I am willing to bet my shirt that the weapon itself cannot be passed as a prototype for trial within 6 months." Harris's superior, Sir Charles Portal, disagreed. On February 19, 1943, Portal authorized the conversion of 3 Lancaster bombers to test the Upkeep bouncing bomb. But time was ticking. In 3 months, the reservoirs would be full of water after the spring thaw. 1 week later, Operation Chastise, the destruction of the Ruhr dams, was authorized. Within 2 days, Wallis had completed his initial designs for Upkeep. Production of the first bombs began immediately at Vickers Armstrong. The first modified Lancaster was finished on April 8th. Following ground trials of the aircraft and the bomb release mechanism, the first drop of Upkeep was made 5 days later. The first 3 bombs disintegrated on impact. It appeared that Wallis's ingenious plan was doomed. Meanwhile, the commander of 5 Group, Air Vice Marshal Rafe Cochrane, had formed a new squadron of Lancaster bomber crews to conduct Operation Chastise. For security reasons, it was initially known as Squadron X, but was later designated 617 Squadron. It was formed around aircrew from 106 Squadron. The highly decorated 24-year-old Wing Commander Guy Gibson, a veteran of over 150 missions, would lead the new squadron. He was always accompanied by his black Labrador. Gibson also paid special attention did the selection of the ground crews who would service and arm his aircraft, and chose the best from 5 group. March 21, 1943. The 21 air crews of 617 were assembled at RAF Scampton. 617 Squadron was a prime example of the wealth of talent the British Empire offered to the Royal Air Force. Among the 133 men were 29 Canadians, 12 Australians, 2 New Zealanders, and 1 American, Joe McCarthy, who had joined the Royal Canadian Air Force to fight in Europe. But the release mechanism of the high-ball bouncing bomb was causing problems. Afraid of compromising the secrecy of their new weapon, the Admiralty argued against the strike on the dams. The Chiefs of Staff, however, determined that the attacks go forward in May when the reservoirs would be at their fullest. .617 Squadron began low-level flights at 150 feet over English reservoirs day and night, but the crews were not informed of the nature of their targets. Only Gibson knew the squadron's mission: to attack the Ruhr dams. Trials of upkeep continued. In order to facilitate the bomb's manufacture, its spherical shape was changed to cylindrical. On April 29th, just 4 weeks before Operation Chastise was to begin, it was dropped successfully. The trials revealed yet another challenge. The attacks had to be made from only 60 feet to avoid damage to the bomb on impact with the water.
To make the device work, I had to ask Guy Gibson to come down to a height of 60 feet. Well, one felt in doing that one was endangering those men's lives simply to make an idea work. And that is misery if you want to know what it's like.
The crews found it almost impossible to maintain such a height, particularly at night. No altimeter was that precise. An engineer at the Royal Aircraft Establishment came up with a solution. A pair of lights mounted below the aircraft. When flying at the required height, the lights would create a figure-8 pattern on the surface of the water.
Down, down. Now hold it now. Fine.
On an approach run, the navigator could direct the pilot to make any corrections. At the same time, the wireless operator could control the rotation rate of the bomb 10 minutes before release. 500 revolutions per minute would impart the necessary backspin. The bomb had to be released 425 yards from the dam, plus or minus 40 yards. The Möhne and Eder dams had 2 towers on their parapets, 600 feet apart. Engineers determined that a simple V-shaped device with nails on each tip could calculate the correct distance for release. In a few short weeks, 617 Squadron underwent intensive training, flying over 1,000 hours and dropping 2,288 practice bombs. On May 11th, the flight leaders of 617 Squadron flew practice missions using inert upkeep bombs filled with concrete. Squadron leader Henry Maudsley's Lancaster was damaged during a bombing run when spray from the bomb hit the aircraft. So one of the prototype planes was flown down to Scampton at the last moment as a spare for the raid. On May 13th, the first and only test of a live upkeep bomb was undertaken off the Kent coast. It worked perfectly. May 15, 1943. Operation Chastise, Britain's attack on German dams, is scheduled for the next day. The last Lancasters were delivered to 617 Squadron. VHF radios installed in the aircraft allowed Commander Guy Gibson to communicate with each and every one of his squadron's aircraft at all times during the raid. Aerial reconnaissance flights showed that the Ruhr Dam reservoirs were now full. And there was one last check for any new anti-aircraft defenses. Recently, most of the heavier 88mm anti-aircraft guns had been withdrawn. The Möhne Dam was now defended mainly by 37 and 20mm automatic cannons. The Lancasters had to be lifted by cranes in order to load the upkeep bombs. The oversized bombs were then winched into the bomb bays. Each of these aerial mines weighed 9,250 pounds, was packed with 6,600 pounds of Torpex explosives, and set to detonate at a depth of 30 feet. 617 Squadron was ready for action when the briefing on its top-secret targets finally came. The attacks would be undertaken in 3 waves. In the first wave, 9 aircraft led by Guy Gibson would attack the Möhne and Eder dams. The second wave of 5 aircraft would attack the Sorpe Dam. The third wave, also of 5 aircraft, would take off 2 hours later, target any dam still intact, or reserve targets including 3 other dams. The code word for a successful attack against the Möhne Dam was to be Nigger, after Guy Gibson's dog. Tragically, shortly before Operation Chastise was mounted, the dog was run over and killed. It was a bad sign. On the evening of the 15th, the order to execute Operation Chastise was given by the Chief of Air Staff, Sir Charles Portal. Sunday, May 16, 1943. The activity at RAF Scampton was frantic as last-minute preparations were made to the Lancaster bombers. In the long minutes before takeoff, the air crews tried in vain to relax. Many went through their good luck rituals. An Australian pilot, Flight Lieutenant Mickey Martin, tucked a toy koala bear into his flying jacket. Sergeant Douglas Webb took a bath. He was convinced he would not survive and wished to die clean. Many told jokes too loudly. Most smoked. Eventually, it was time to go.
Yes, everything's okay, sir. Full bang on, is it? Yes, everything's bang on, sir. Right here.
At 21:28 hours, the green light was given. The Special Lancasters of 617 Squadron took to the air with their ungainly bomb loads. To avoid detection by enemy radar and night fighters, the Lancasters flew as low as possible across the North Sea. Once over the Dutch coast, the Lancasters dropped to treetop level. At that altitude, high-tension electrical power lines were particularly dangerous. There were several near misses. Some were not so lucky. Flight Lieutenant Bill Astle and his crew in Lancaster B for Baker were early victims when their aircraft hit an electric support tower. As the Lancasters approached Germany, air defenses of searchlights and anti-aircraft guns intensified. The air gunners fought back with vigor, their tracer rounds arcing through the night. Even so, both of the first two waves lost an aircraft to German flak. Guy Gibson and his remaining 8 Lancasters of the first wave arrived over the Muna Dam soon after midnight. Gibson later recalled, "In that light it looked squat and heavy and unconquerable. It looked gray and solid in the moonlight, as though it were part of the countryside itself, and just as immovable."
There it is, boys. Bit aggressive, aren't they? Someone's woken them up. What do you think about it, Bob? My goodness, it's big, isn't it? Can we really break that? How many guns do you think there are, Trevor? I say there's about 10 guns. Some in the field and some in the towers. You seem to have upset them a bit.
After circling the dam, Gibson radioed his men.
Hello, all cooler aircraft. I'm going in to attack. Stand by to come in your order when I tell it. Check height, Teddy. Speed control, Fulford. Gunners ready. Coming up, Spam. 220. This is fine. I can see everything. Down a little. 230. 230. 30. Down a little. 235. Stand by to pull me out of the seat if I get hit. Steady. 240. Steady. Hold it, steady. 235. Hold it. 240. Hold it. 235. That's fine. 235. Long gun! It's still there!
The bomb exploded some 50 yards from the center of the dam. The water subsided, and there was no breach. The next attack was made by Flight Lieutenant Hoppy Hopgood in M for Mother. It was immediately hit by flak, and the engine burst into flames. The bomb bounced over the dam parapet and exploded on the power station below. Hopgood tried desperately to gain a height so that his crew could bail out. 3 managed to do so. Only 2 survived. M for Mother crashed in flames at a place called Himmelpforten, the gateway to heaven. With Gibson flying in parallel to draw the flak, Flight Lieutenant Mickey Martin launched the next attack in P for Popsy. The bomb exploded with a massive plume of water, but again, there was no breach. The 4th Lancaster to attack was flown by Squadron Leader Dingy Young in A for Apple. Flanked by Gibson and Martin to distract the German gunners, A for Apple made a perfect bombing run, and the upkeep exploded precisely on target. But when the water subsided, the dam still held. Next came J for Joker with Flight Lieutenant David Maltby at the controls. His upkeep bomb was dropped with deadly precision, but even as it bounced towards the target, the dam began to crumble. The Muna Dam collapsed, disgorging a gigantic torrent of water. Barnes Wallace had been right all along. One bomb exploding at exactly the right spot was sufficient to breach a dam. The attack on the Mona Dam was a success, but there were more dams to be destroyed. After successfully breaking the Muna Dam in Germany, Lancaster commanders Gibson and Young now led the 3 remaining aircraft to the Eder Dam, some 10 minutes away. The approach to the Eder Dam was even more difficult than the Mona, but this time there was no flak. At 0120 hours, 20-year-old Flight Lieutenant David Shannon made the first of 3 bombing runs, trying to align L for leather on the target before he released his bomb. It bounced wide and exploded without breaching the dam. The second bomb was dropped by Squadron Leader Henry Maudsley, but it hit the left side of the dam. The third and final bomb was released by Pilot Officer Les Knight in Lancaster N for NAD. It was dead on target. Gibson later recalled that the dam collapsed as if a gigantic hand had punched a hole through cardboard. Meanwhile, the second wave assigned to attacking the Sorpa Dam had fared badly. 1 was lost to flak. 2 had to return to England after suffering technical problems. A 4th Lancaster, E for Easy, struck power lines and crashed. Its upkeep bomb failed to explode and was soon recovered by the Germans. Unlike the other dams, the Sorpa was constructed differently. Its concrete core lay between earth and clay banks. It would be even more difficult to destroy. The last aircraft of the second wave, T for Tommy, was flown by the American Lieutenant Joe McCarthy. By now, mist was descending over the reservoir, but around the dam itself visibility was clear. To ensure accuracy, McCarthy flew parallel with the dam using the spire of a local church to align the Lancaster on its target. T for Tommy dropped its bomb right on top of the parapet. It was a brilliant feat of precision flying, but the explosion caused no breach. F for Freddy of the third wave made another attack on the Sorpa Dam, but the mist was becoming a serious problem. Flight Sergeant Kenneth Brown made a preliminary bombing run to allow his bomb aimer, Sergeant Stefan Wansia, to gauge the target. On its second run, F for Freddy dropped its bomb on target, but again a breach never occurred. Even so, the dam required extensive repairs. The only remaining Lancaster, Ova Orange, attacked the Ennepa Dam at 0338, but without success. Operation Chastise was over. Several crews had already returned to RAF Scampton and were being debriefed. 2 dams had been successfully destroyed and a 3rd damaged. Bomber Harris was present and was quick to congratulate Barnes-Wallis on the success of the mission.
There is no greater joy in life than first proving that a thing is impossible and then showing how it can be done. Any number of experts had pronounced that the Murney and the Ada dams could not possibly be destroyed by any known means. And then one goes and shows how it can be done. But mind you, the doing was done by Guy Gibson and 617 Squadron, not by me.
The last Lancaster, Ova Orange, landed at RAF Scampton at 0615 hours on May 17th, after its unsuccessful attack on the Ennepa Dam. The cost in men and machines was high. 8 of the 19 Lancasters never returned. In all, 53 men were killed in action and 3 were captured. Among the dead was Squadron Leader Dingy Young, whose upkeep bomb had breached the Muna Dam. He had been nicknamed Dinghy because twice before he had managed to nurse damaged bombers back to the North Sea, where the crews were retrieved from their rescue dinghies. A for Apple made it to the coast, but crashed on the shoreline. All the crew were killed. So too were those on B. Baker, C. Charlie, E. Easy, K. King, M. Mother, S. Sugar, Z. Zebra. It was a horrifying loss, 42%. During World War II, the overall loss rate of RAF bombers was only 2.5%. As the commanding officer, it was Gibson's mirthless duty to inform the families of the fate of their missing sons, brothers, and fathers. Sergeant Frank Tees, fortunately, was one of the 3 airmen who was taken prisoner and survived. The British newspapers were given unprecedented information about Operation Chastise, and dramatic headlines were published around the world. At a dark time of the war, the operation was an enormous boost to both British and American morale. On May 19th, Churchill praised the operation during a speech to the U.S. Congress. After many months of gallant but mostly ineffective bombing against Nazi Germany, RAF Bomber Command was now held in the highest esteem. The dam busters of Operation Chastise succeeded in its mission to damage German industry. Goebbels wrote that the raid presented a dark picture of destruction. Roads and bridges were swept away and several important factories destroyed. At least 1,200 were killed. Tragically, most of them were Russian female slave workers, and the Nazis exploited their deaths for propaganda purposes. Vast tracts of fertile agricultural land were devastated, forcing food and other supplies to be diverted from elsewhere. To repair the dams, thousands of workers were transferred from the Channel coast, thereby slowing the construction of fortifications against the expected Allied invasion of occupied Europe. Thousands of soldiers were redeployed to guard the remaining dams and man the hundreds of anti-aircraft guns that were now installed at every dam site. The reconstruction of the Möhne and Eder dams took months, monopolizing skilled labor at the cost of other German war projects. The deaths of 53 gallant airmen saved thousands of Allied soldiers on the Normandy beaches in June 1944. On May 27, 1943, King George VI visited 617 Squadron. The King was introduced to the survivors of the raid, including David Shannon, who turned 21 that day. On June 22nd, Wing Commander Guy Gibson and 30 members of 617 Squadron went to Buckingham Palace to receive 33 gallantry awards from the King, including 14 Distinguished Flying Crosses. But foremost among them was the Victoria Cross, awarded to Guy Gibson for his valor and outstanding leadership during the raid. At the time, Gibson was the most decorated member of the Royal Air Force. Wallace was granted £10,000, but declined the award, quoting the Bible, Samuel 2, chapter 23, "Is not this the blood of men that went in jeopardy of their lives?" The Germans quickly uncovered the secrets of Wallace's bouncing bomb after the one from E for Easy was captured intact. They spent thousands of man-hours and scarce resources to develop their own version of the bomb, codenamed Kurt. It was never used in action. It was another aspect of Operation Chastise's success, diverting the German war industry down unproductive paths. 617 Squadron was retained within 5 Group to undertake more specialized bombing raids for Bomber Command. Gibson was relieved of his command on August 3rd in order to conduct morale-boosting tours of the United Kingdom and United States. But soon he returned to active duty and was killed in action on September 19, 1944. He had completed 177 sorties, and since the first day of the war had flown operations virtually without a break. His untimely death came at the age of 26. Barnes-Wallis went on to design other extraordinary weapons. He developed his original earthquake bomb into the 12,000-pound Tallboy. It required extraordinary high-precision casting and engineering to attain supersonic speeds and not disintegrate on impact. 617 Squadron dropped the first Tallboy bombs on the Samur Railway Tunnel on June 8, 1944, to stop German panzer divisions moving to the Normandy beachhead. They then destroyed the Nazi V3 supergun in France. The supergun was nearly operational and would have been capable of bombarding London with 600 tons of high explosives a day. It never got the chance. And then on November 12, 1944, Wallis's Tallboy bombs achieved perhaps their greatest success when they sank the battleship Tirpitz at its lair in a Norwegian fjord. The once impregnable reinforced concrete U-boat and E-boat pens along the French coast also succumbed to the Tallboy. The pocket battleship Lutzow was next on the list of victims. Wallis's ultimate bomb design was the 22,000-pound Grand Slam, the largest and heaviest ever used in warfare. It was a true earthquake bomb. 617 Squadron dropped the first Grand Slam on the Bielefeld Viaduct on March 14, 1945. Scores of raids and tons of bombs had failed to cut this vital line of communication from the Ruhr into Germany. One Grand Slam did the trick. After the war, Barnes-Wallis went on to engineer some of the world's most innovative aircraft, including the Swallow with its swing wing concept. This design was eventually adopted by the Royal Air Force in the Tornado multi-role combat aircraft. 617 Squadron lives on today. It remains immensely proud of its heritage as the Dam Busters. The raid against the Ruhr dams in May 1943 remains one of the greatest feats of precision bombing and airmanship in history.